Hey guys, what's up? It's been a while since I've uploaded a Master Duel video, and so I thought I would give you guys an update as to what I'm playing and show you a couple of decks that I've tried to use. The main deck I'm still playing is Labrynth, still my favorite deck, and I've been tweaking it and playing different versions of the deck, and so I'll kind of show that off today as the main focus, and now we'll go from there. So I'm going to start off with the most basic build I have. This build is essentially just plain Labrynth. There's no um, secondary engine per se, and so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the deck. I'll just run it through it really quickly, and then we'll move on to the next deck. So the first deck here, or the first version of the deck, is just, like I said, pure Labrynth, with a focus on using um, destructive karma cannon here to destructive karma cannon with areas to kind of shut down our opponent's turn as kind of a turn ender. So that's probably the strongest interaction you got in this particular deck, going second. Because hand traps are nice, but they don't always end people's turn. Where something like maybe a Nibiru or a karma cannon will, or maybe Nibiru plus karma cannon, or you know, some sort of variation of that would generally end someone's turn, especially if you're playing Snake Eye or Synchro deck or even Exceed deck. Karma Cannon's a lot better than something like a D Barrier. While D Barrier is nice, D Barrier doesn't really work against a Link deck. So if you're playing against a Link climbing deck, such as Snake Eyes or Rescue Ace or anything like that, Karma Cannon is definitely a lot better. And yeah, we're gonna kind of jump into it and talk about it. The only thing that Karma Cannon doesn't really work too well against is fusion decks, but Karma Cannon can still act as a Book of Moon to kind of protect yourself. It's not great against Mirror Jade, obviously, but it's still better than nothing. You can still protect yourself and maybe run over Mirror Jade, but you know you may or may not lose your monsters in that particular case. All right, so for the build, we're maximizing on our furniture. So you have one clock, two Toby, and two Chandelier, and then obviously you got the Ariana, and you have triple Arias. So Arias's main purpose is to either summon um, Ariana during your opponent's turn, and or just hit any of your traps, and that's her main purpose. So that works really well. If not, she's also a pretty decent discard fodder for your Toby and Chandelier. So she's never really dead in your hand. I always found some sort of use for her. It's only bad, or she's only bad when you draw no traps and you just see a bunch of monsters, or see a bunch of hand traps. Then yes, it's not that great. But for the most part, she does her job really well, and I think it's worth just playing 3 copies just to see if we can get it in our opening hands. As for the rest of the deck, it's pretty standard. You can choose to play one lady or one silver or two. I decided to play two. I like lady. I like her as a beat stick, and sometimes I like using her as a body to link climb into Little Knight if you have nothing else to do, or sometimes she's just a good body to defend yourself if you have nothing else on the field and your opponent's attacking you for a game. You can always flip Big Welcome, summon her, bring her back to the hand, summon her again, and she'll be a 25 or 29 body on the board to protect yourself. So let's technically I always play two in my most of my Labrynth deck if you're tight on space and or you just don't care for her. She does sometimes break up your hand, so you can cut her to one. In this in Master Duel, I just like her at two. She's worked out pretty well. Then obviously I have here two Nibiru as a secondary hand trap. Sometimes Maxi just doesn't cut it, or sometimes Karma Cannon doesn't cut it. So it's nice to have a backup to either Maxi or Karma Cannon. And like I said, this build is focusing on ending your opponent's turn if you're going second, which I think for the most part it does pretty well. Does pretty good job at doing. So yeah, that's why we have the Nibiru, the Maxi, Karma Cannon. As for spells, you could play Pot of Prosperity. I found I haven't really needed it as much. It's good going first, going second, it's not that great. So that's why I kind of cutted it. Same thing with Call by Graves. Going second with Call by Graves isn't that great, honestly, but I feel like it's got enough targets to hit that it's still worth playing. Sometimes you need to um, summon a bunch of monsters in order to break your opponent's board, and if you get max seed, it's very hard to just pass turn. Like you won't be able to win if you're going second sometimes, and your opponent max sees you on your first turn, which is why I decided to just go ahead and play the Call by the Graves for this particular version of the deck. You also provides a little bit of protection against Ash Blossom, but you're not so worried about Ash if you're playing Transaction, because Transaction kind of adds a bit of redundancy and resiliency to your basic combo of Big Welcome. So it's up to you. Also, I guess the main issue with Call By is also it doesn't really work well with areas. Sometimes you are rather up your trap counts, and that's totally understandable. You can definitely add more traps to take out Call by the Graves. You could add in um, Dogmatica Punishment, for example. That's a very popular card right now, and I will go into some builds that do play Dogmatica Punishment. For this particular build, I wanted to focus more on using my extra deck as a utility tool to summons, as I do go into Chaos Angel and Little Light a lot more um, than not. So, which is why I'm just playing the Call by the Graves just to stop Maxi. Most of the time, majority of the time, Maxi doesn't hurt you. Like I would say 80% of the time, but there are some times you just need to summon a lot, especially with Toby. If you get Toby in your hand and you pitch and get Big Welcome, you activate Big Welcome, and they maxi you, it is very hard to come back from that in terms of card advantage, because you just lost 2 cards. Now you have to debate whether you want to give your opponent an extra card because you're going to summon Toby and a Big Welcome. So sometimes just being able to call by the Graves, the Big Welcome, or the maxi helps you to bring out bodies on the board and to potentially link climb. So that's why we're caught by Call by Graves. In real life, in the TCG, I don't even bother playing with this card just because Maxis I'm in the format, so not really worried about that. So I just completely cut it. But in Master Duel, I think it's something to potentially play. As for the rest of the trap, the only thing that's kind of out of place is Terra's the Overroot. I found this card it does what Over or Karma Cannon doesn't do, which is hard removal, and it interacts with the grave for those occasions where you do need to interact with the grave. This makes more sense in the Horus environment where they play King's Cacophagous and they have a maybe Mseti in the graveyard or something like that. They activate, I don't know, the Gold Sarcophagus to dump another monster and pitch a card in the hand. You can activate Terrors, send King's Sarcophagus to the graveyard, summon Mseti, and then you kind of mess up their combo that way. So they just minus a bunch of cards to do absolutely nothing. So that's why Terror's Root's kind of good. It's not as strong as it used to be when Castura was around, because you can mess up Castura a lot with summoning a face down Maxi or something like that, or Ash Blossom if they have that in their graveyard, and then not allow them to summon any of their cash monsters. Nowadays, it's just kind of regulated to those weird niche interaction. You can definitely play something else. You can play Eradicator if you like, or you can play maybe D Barrier. But I found I haven't really needed D Barrier all that much in this particular format right now, just because D Barrier is not that great against Snake Eyes, and sometimes you play against a mirror match, not that great. Where Terra's Overroot in a best of 1 situation is probably more versatile than D Barrier is. Transactional rollback or transaction rollback, pretty good card. Sometimes can break your hand. But I've liked it at 3, and especially it's really good in the mirror match because oftentimes you can set it with Lady and activate it and copy your opponent's Big Welcome or Small Welcome, and then use it again on your turn. So it's really good in the mirror match for sure. But like I said, like I mentioned earlier, it gives your deck a little bit more resiliency against Ash Blossom, which really hurts. As for the rest of the deck, that's basically it, right? So for extra deck, like I said, it's just utility, whatever you guys want. I do recommend Chaos Angel and Little Knight. Everything else is kind of up to personal preference. Clara is for main phase 2 if you want to summon out Little Knight and to banish a card. Relinquish your Animal, same thing. You can just Clue Clock and Anima. Or you can use Dark and summon a Dark monster, and then you can go into Little Knight, assuming you're not locked out using Welcome Labrynth. Um, if you use Welcome Labrynth, then you cannot go into SP, but you can still go into Chaos Angel, and with triple areas, it's pretty easy to do so. Everything else is just kind of utility. Sometimes I still go into Divisor King. Probably don't recommend it as much, but it is there. You can play like maybe a Exoton instead or something like that. You can also um, play maybe like Abyss Dweller or more Babushka if you think you need more Babushka. But yeah, Blacklisted Soldier, in case you just playing against Sky Striker or something, you summon out Blacklisted Soldier, they just give up because they can't really remove this thing. Um, yeah, and Goddess is for basically anything that is um, well, I guess it's basically for anything that is unaffected, but because of Karma Cannon, you don't really run into that issue anymore. Back then, it was they something like a Raid Raptor boss or maybe a Blackluster Soldier or something where it's really hard to remove. Back then, it would be almost impossible for this deck to do so. Now you're playing triple Karma Cannon, so any of the unaffected towers like monsters pretty easy to deal with the current build of Labrynth. Okay, so that's the first sort of deck. So this is kind of like your basis to build off of, and obviously you can cut it to 40 cards and cut out a couple of different cards here and there. But let's move on to the next variation. The next one I want to show you guys is going to be this one right here. So this is Unchained version of Labrynth. So I haven't really perfected this deck quite yet. As you can see, you only really have 2 Unchained card. Escape, you don't particularly need Escape, but it is nice to have it with Shavara, and Escape works okay even if you pitch it to the graveyard and you have transaction a rollback in the graveyard. You can still copy Escape, pop a card, and trigger all your traps and monster effects. So I've done that before. What I don't like about this particular version of the deck is that it loses more to Maxi, which is why I'm playing more Call by the Graves here, just to make sure I don't get Maxied. It's definitely more proactive than the other version, the first version of the deck, because going first you could be able to set up Soul of Rage, and you'll have Lord Yama in the graveyard, things like that. So it's really nice, but I found that sometimes maybe you brick on Shavara or you draw Escape, or you get Maxied and you don't have an out to Maxi. Kind of hard to play this particular version of the deck, but it is kind of fun and very proactive and still really strong. It's just I think you don't need the Unchained version or Unchained cards to play the deck well. So yeah, that's kind of the basic look of the deck there. And then we got, let's see here, the Lab plus Dogmatica version of the deck. So in this particular deck, you don't really need Call by the Graves, because you're basically replacing Call by the Graves with the Deer Servant. Most of the time, the Deer Servant will eat an Ash Blossom for you, so you don't really need to Call by the Graves, and you don't really special summon in this deck. Your extra deck becomes basically unusable, just because you have Ecclesia and you have Maximus and you got Punishment, so you're almost never summoning anything from your extra deck. It's just there to be fodder for Punishment and fodder for Nadir's Servant. Now, basically you're only running 4 or 6 cards for the Dogmatica engine, and let me kind of run them real quick. So with Nadir, the reason why I have both Maximus and Ecclesia is that sometimes you draw Nadir plus Ecclesia, and so if that does happen, then you don't really have a way to activate Nadir unless you can discard Ecclesia to the graveyard via your furniture. If that is something you can do, then yes, you can use Nadir to just add back Ecclesia from the graveyard. However, I find that playing this deck that I draw often both Ecclesia and Nadir, so I decided I wanted to add a second target. So Maximus was my choice. I've tried Fleur before, but unfortunately, uh, Fleur doesn't really do much. It's just a beat stick. You can never use its negate effect because you never have Ecclesia or another dogmatic monster on the board in order to use its negation effect. So more or less, it was just a beat stick. But for it to work as a beat stick, you need a extra deck monster on the field. Most of the time, if you're playing this deck the way it's supposed to be played, your opponent shouldn't have any extra deck monsters on the field, and you rarely have an extra deck monster on the field. So most of the time, it was just discard fodder. So I decided to play Maximus simply because it's 1500 attack, so it's lower. It's low enough so that you can use it with Garura and still draw a card, and then summon it if you banish Garura from the graveyard, and then go from there. And the things you dump to the graveyard would probably be the Phantom Beasts, or maybe you want to draw more cards, or something later down the line. So that's its utility. That's all you really need to do with it. And yeah, as for the rest of the engine, you just got 2 punishment. You can play 3 if you wanted to. I don't think you need 3. 2 is good. I never liked triple punishment, namely because it's a hard once per turn. So if you open multiple of this or you search multiple of this, you're not gonna be able to use them all the time, and it does lock you out from your extra decks. So it's one of those cards where you gotta weigh the benefits of activating it versus not. Okay, so for extra deck, I went for 2 Entis, 2 Garura. You can definitely just play one of each if you wanted to make your extra deck a little bit more utility. We don't have Pack in this game yet, and there's not many other good targets for Nadir. You could play Super Poly maybe if you wanted to in this deck. I don't really recommend Super Poly. The only other card you can really play in here would be the Unchained cards. You can send those to the graveyard, and those they'll work okay. But I find that 2 Nadir plus 2 Garura is good enough. Plus, it gives you more target for Maximus to be useful. As for the Phantom Beasts, you really only play one of each. This one lets you summon from your graveyard during your opponent's turn, and this one lets you summon from your banish during your opponent's turn. Any fiend or beast or illusion monster. Namely, you're gonna use this to bring back Lovely if it gets banished by a spell. Maybe it gets banished by Ice Prison Mirror or something like that. Then you can bring it back. Yeah, you have a way to bring it back and reoccur it in case it does get banished. If it gets banished face down, then there's really not much you can really do about that. This is basically, it turns your punishment into a compulsory emergency device, which is kind of nice. So you can use this to target Mirror Jade, send it back to the deck, and it won't activate its destruction effect, for example, or any other card that you want to return that you can't destroy. Maybe it has indestructible, or it has some sort of graveyard effect that you don't want to trigger. Then this card is great for that. This one is good for just negating an effect. Maybe your opponent has a floodgate that you need to negate for the turn, or they have a very important piece of their combo that they need to activate. Then this card is great for that. You just send it with punishment and you can negate the card for the turn. Alright, so that's basically the Lab Dogmatica version. And then finally, let me show you the last deck, which is currently what's being played in the TCG and in a lot of the YCSs that I've been topping. So this is kind of like my alliteration of the deck. The main difference here is you have Max C instead of Nibiru, and you obviously only have 2 of each furniture rather than the full 3. So yeah, let me go ahead and talk about the deck real quick here. So everything right here is basically almost carbon copy of what you see at a YCS. I decided to play 2 transactional. So transactional has its pros and its cons. The main con that is it doesn't really work well with Arias, and it doesn't really work well with Absolute King Blackjack, just because it doesn't do anything unless your opponent has something like an impermanence in the graveyard. Otherwise, transaction throwback doesn't do anything. It can brick your hand a lot more, especially in this Master Duel where you only got 2 of each furniture, a total of 4 pieces. If you open a transaction, you open blackjack, and you open a furniture, you can discard one of them, but the other one becomes a brick. So, which is why we don't want to play 3 copies. We play 2 copies at most, maybe even cut this out completely and play something else. That's perfectly fine. I think 2 has been okay. You know, it's still, I still like to give myself a little bit of resilient against Ash Blossom, so that's why we got the 2 transactional rollback in here. But it's definitely not needed. You could definitely cut it for something else. As for spells, we're not really playing anything else. We're not really playing Extravagance, or we're not really playing um, Call by the Graves, because this particular version of the deck is not very weak to Call by the Graves, because it's not really focused on summoning a ton of monsters. It's just focused on interacting with your opponent's board via all the trap cards that you have, and just basically kind of recycling them. And yeah, so just a bunch of turn 0 plays, so you're not really summoning a ton. So max C doesn't really matter to you. It still sucks to get Ash, but you still have lots of ways to occur your cards, especially being able to activate Welcome Labrynth or Big Welcome using a furniture plus Jack. If you happen to see one of these cards that you can activate on your opponent's turn, which is kind of nice. And if it gets Ash, it's cool. You'll have it in the graveyard to use for the next turn. If you have, if you discarded, these 2, and go from there. All right, and then as for the extra decks, looks pretty similar to the Dogmatica one, because you're just basically using your extra deck as a utility, never really going into it. It's just there. But basically, this particular one, I wanted to play 1 of each, because we're not playing the Deer. We're unlikely to send Garuda twice, or unlikely to send Entis twice. With Nadir, I'd probably play 2 copies of each, but without Nadir, we're just playing essentially just the 1 of everything here, and trying to maybe use our extra deck to be a little bit more utility with the SP Little Knight here. Alright, so yeah, so that's basically the 4 versions of the deck I have here, and I played them pretty extensively. My favorite being the original, the no other particular engine. I love this particular version of the deck. Oh, I failed to mention here. So with Blackjack, if you do draw Blackjack and you have no way of discarding him, you can always summon him and link him away for the Link Karibo. That's why Link Karibo is in here. Then you activate Blackjack immediately, and then maybe you can summon a furniture or something like that, and then that way you can go into SP Little Knight and use it as removal. So that's why the Link Karibo is kind of important in this particular deck. Or you can use it with Relinquish Anima. Either way, it doesn't really matter which one you use. But yeah, I forgot to sort of mention that. Back to what I was talking about. I think the basic version of the deck has been the most consistent. It's been the most it's worked well against pretty much any other deck I've played against. So I think I like this one the best. It's just very cookie cutter, but it does what it needs to do. Basically, play on turn 0 a majority of the time. If not, your first turn is generally pretty strong, pretty resilient to any hand traps your opponent might have. And then your extra deck, I like, it's just utility. You can do whatever you want with it. You can summon the Visor King. You can summon Exiton. It doesn't really matter. You have like so many plays you can do. So that's why I like this particular version of the deck. Next best version of the deck, I would say, is the Blackjack version. This one's also focused on a lot of turn 0 plays, which is very strong in Master Duels. Since it's basically a best of 1 format, you want to be able to do something on your opponent's turn, going second. So I think this version of the deck is pretty strong. Sometimes you do brick though. Sometimes you won't draw any activatable cards with areas, or sometimes you'll miss with Blackjack. Doesn't happen all the time, but you run into those issues sometimes, which is why I rank this one a little bit lower than the basic version. And then between Unchained and Dogmatica, I would probably rate Unchained above Dogmatica, but just because it's more proactive. It's weaker going second, and it's also weak against Max C, but I do like its you know it being more proactive than the Dogmatica version, allowing you to set up a bunch of Unchained monsters to interrupt your opponent's plays and all that. But yeah, and then the this version I think is like um, a version where I see a lot when I'm playing against the mirror, and I think this version is a lot weaker against just the basic version of Labrynth. At least from my experience, when I play rank and I play against a mirror match, most of the time I've seen this version where it's got Ecclesia and Nadir. Um, it seems weaker and less consistent because sometimes it seems like they clog up their hands or they get really weird hands or they have to choose either to summon Ariana or Ecclesia. That's one thing I didn't like about this particular deck is just having to choose to normal summon either Ecclesia or Ariana, and you're most of the time you're locked out of your extra deck, which kind of sucks because your extra deck is, while you don't really go into it all that often, it is really nice to do so, especially when you have um, the ability to go into Little Knight and Chaos Angel, which are very, very good cards, or just Relinquish Anima if you need to answer something, etc. This version of the deck, just half your extra deck is just utility for punishment and Nadir, and the other half is stuff you summon, which I feel like is not that great. It tries to be both of best worlds, but it doesn't really do one particular aspect better than the other. So I like this version the least. But yeah. Alright guys, that's basically it. Once again, I can show you guys my rank. I've been kind of just playing on and off here and there. I haven't really tried for Masters all that much, but I've gotten Plat ones a few times. Sometimes I just play until for the month and just get the diamond, just get the gems and let my rank reset. But yeah, I mean it's definitely a deck that you can easily take through diamond and into master if you grind a little bit. It has a pretty good Snake Eye matchup. Uh, Obviously, if Snake Eyes goes first and they go ham and you just don't have any interaction, then yeah, it's a game that you may not win. But if you end up going first and you set up your board, Snake Eye has a very difficult time outing a Karma Cannon, outing a hand trap, and whatnot. So at least outing both Karma Cannon and a hand trap. Most of the time they'll just end on their board and it's pretty empty and it's really easy to break. Yeah. And same thing with when he summon out Diabell Star. Sometimes you don't want to remove Diabell Star on your turn just because then they summon Diabell Star again and they start that combo. Sometimes it's better just to flip it face down and then just remove Diabell Star on their turn, and so it doesn't give them the chance to reoccur Diabell Star. So that's kind of nice. And then with this particular version, your entire extra deck is just utility, and you're not really locked out of your extra deck as much. Yeah, the Welcome Labrynth will sometimes lock you out of summoning some particular monsters like Little Knight, but for the most part you have full access to your extra deck, which is kind of nice. And yeah, pretty consistent in terms of being able to play on your opponent's turn. Alright guys, that's it, and let me know if you have any questions and comments down below. I'll see you guys next time.